They are supposed to be the silent part of our American government decision-making process, speaking only at designated times and keeping opinions to themselves. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg has broken the unspoken rule and fired off a few hits at Donald Trump, and in the process highlights what is at the hard core of this coming presidential battle. And the controversy could not have come at a better time for the presumptive Republican nominee. His polling numbers are getting better as America reacts to the recent email revelations about Hillary Clinton. As we all remember, poll numbers in July mean next to nothing come November, all right? And Americans must continue to ask themselves why they should care about the vice presidential choice. It's an easy one, because the choices may very well be a governor who isn't popular in his own state, a retired admiral being one breath away from running this nation. We'll run it with all your phone comments at 1-877-Newsmax, 1-877-639-7629. You need to be lining up right now. I'm Ed Berliner, and this is The Hardline for Wednesday, July 13th, 2016.
Well, it seems to me that it's totally inappropriate for a member of the Supreme Court to be weighing in on an American election. It raises the level of skepticism that the American people have from time to time about just how objective the Supreme Court is, whether they're over there to call the balls and strikes or to weigh in on one side or another. So I think Justice Ginsburg's remarks were totally inappropriate.
The daily nonsense of what is said and what isn't being promised by the presidential candidates belies one of, if not the core, of what the two parties are truly fighting for this political season, the future. Time some of us will never experience, but will have a hand in deciding this year. And for those who understand what the presidential chase is all about, they will tell you this is much more than building a wall, searching out illegal immigrants, refusing to release tax returns, or potentially lying under oath about email servers. For those are petty annoyances in the big picture. This is an election like so many others that will decide the course of American politics and life, with appointments to the Supreme Court. And with one seat still vacant and the fights in Congress showing no sign of abating with regard to that replacement, the election of a president that will seek to fill new vacancies with no thought whatsoever about being nonpartisan is the greatest challenge and the greatest fear of those who grasp this importance. Anybody who is appointed a member of these Supremes is there for life, and they will change the course of America with their decisions, doing it in most cases without personal and public comment, letting their written words speak for them. Which is why when one current member of the court makes the call to go public with cutting remarks about an individual who may very well be deciding who takes over her seat one day, it becomes more than simply news. It becomes a flashpoint for Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Independents, and those of any and all political stripe to simply wonder what this means for the highest court in the land and their supposed task of speaking softly or not at all, and being able to wield that big stick without creating a level of opinion not suited for someone so powerful. Our guests and your phone calls await right after Miranda Kahn puts this all into perspective.
Thanks, Ed. Republicans lash out today after a Supreme Court justice voices her distaste for Donald Trump.
Ruth is really bad only on the knee-jerk stuff. She is.
The late Justice Antonin Scalia, a conservative, considered Justice Ginsburg a friend. But what Justice Ginsburg said about Donald Trump to the New York Times is being described as more than just a simple knee-jerk.
I think it's out of place for an appointed branch of government. That shows bias to me.
Justice Ginsburg told the paper she couldn't imagine what this place or country would be with Donald Trump as our president, saying, quote, "For the country, it could be 4 years. For the court, it could be, I don't even want to contemplate that."
So I think Justice Ginsburg's remarks were totally inappropriate, and I wish she hadn't said them.
But perhaps no one has expressed their disapproval more of Justice Ginsburg's remarks than the Republican presumptive presidential nominee himself, who called her remarks a disgrace to the court and said, quote, to the New York Times, Justice Ginsburg should apologize. He even sent out this tweet calling for her resignation. But if the past is any indication,
we are certainly here to stay.
And a lot of people are reacting to Justice Ginsburg's comments on the right and the left, calling them out of line. The New York Times went as far as saying that her comments could force future rulings to be called into question. Ed, back to you.
All right, thanks, Miranda. So let's get to work. Your phone call's part of what we do here. Get on the line at 1-877-Newsmax. Stay on point, make it brief, get involved. First, let's welcome back the internationally respected professor at the Harvard Law School, Newsmax contributor, prolific author with his latest book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. How can we stop Iran from getting nukes? Something we'll focus on here momentarily. Alan Dershowitz joins us. Alan, good to see you again. Let's get right to the point here of what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. We intimated it. Let's show people who haven't seen it yet. Quote, he, meaning Donald Trump, is a faker. He has no consistency about him. He says whatever comes into his head at the moment. He really has an ego. How has he gotten away with not turning over his tax returns? The press seems to be very gentle with him on that. Now, the New York Times editorial board agreed that Ginsburg should not be speaking on politics, calling it baffling that she would choose to descend toward his level, Donald Trump, and call her own commitment to impartiality into question, basically saying she should not fling herself into the mosh pit here. All right, Alan, is this flat-out bias? Did she cross the line? And does this bring every decision that she has ever made now into question?
No, it doesn't bring any decisions into question. Look, I'm a liberal Democrat, and I support Hillary Clinton, and I oppose Donald Trump, but I think she was wrong in expressing those views. Look, everybody knows she holds those views, just like everybody knew that the late Justice Scalia, who was my friend, held strong views in favor of Republican candidates. But the unwritten law is that justices don't express their views. And I went after Justice O'Connor in 2000 when at a dinner party on the night of the election, she said that the election of Gore would be a disaster. Justices of the Supreme Court should not be expressing political views about who should be elected president of the United States. That is clear beyond any dispute, and I don't know very many people who are defending her. You know, I like her. She's been a good justice. It doesn't bring into question her other opinions, but she made a serious mistake by getting into the election.
How would you answer those, and it's been out there from several different news services today, who say that the only option that you have in penalizing a Supreme Court justice is impeachment as the only legal avenue?
Well, there's no option here because impeachment is not available here. The Constitution provides the basis for impeachment, high crimes and misdemeanors, and this is neither. So she can't be impeached. The tragedy, and it's inexcusable, is that the only 9 judges in the entire United States who don't have to comply with the rules of judicial conduct are the 9 justices, and they just decided that for themselves. It's wrong. It should be a requirement that every justice has to comply with rules of judicial conduct. That's not a violation of separation of powers or checks and balances. It's just the incredible arrogance of the Supreme Court, Republican and Democratic appointees alike, that they don't want to be bound by rules of judicial conduct. I think this may change that. And I think Congress ought to enact rules of judicial conduct and ought to hold justices accountable for making sure they don't violate such rules.
Alan, as the day has gone on, we have a number of different issues that are out here right now that certainly need your opinion on this. So let me throw these at you one at a time here, and let me get your take on these. First of all, speaking of Donald Trump and the Republican National Committee, they will be meeting in Cleveland next week. The new Black Panther Party, a Black Power movement, says we will carry firearms for self-defense during the rallies in Cleveland if allowed under Ohio law. There's a big question now because the Secret Service, the FBI, there's going to be very tight security there. What can they do, if anything? Can they take away the guns or stop weapons being carried in certain areas from people who are guaranteed that by the Constitution?
Let's be very clear. First of all, the Black Panther Party has a long history of racist bigotry. They are not to be respected. They've reflected bigotry of all kind over the years, and they're violent. And the Secret Service does have some authority within the areas surrounding candidates for the presidency. But if it's a demonstration in a public park that happens to be in the same city, no, then local law applies. And one would hope that local law would permit the police to take guns away from violent people who have a history of using guns, not necessarily in self-defense, but in alleged defense of their politics.
I have about 2 minutes left. Let me get you on these. FBI agents who worked on the investigation of Hillary Clinton's use of her email server reportedly had to sign an unusual non-disclosure form, a case briefing acknowledgement, and many of them have said, we never had to do this before. This sounds very strange. This story, as read on Newsmax.com right now. What's your take legally on this?
Well, I think generally FBI agents should not be disclosing what they have turned up in their investigation. That ought to be the rule. Look, I don't think that Director Comey, who I have an enormous amount of respect for, should have gone into the great detail he went into about all the evidence. His job is simply to do the investigation and turn the product of his investigation over to independent prosecutors.
There is another story here that is read on Newsmax as well. Political activist Pamela Geller has sued Facebook because, according to her, she was frequently subjected to censorship due to her views, which the company, Facebook, deems to be anti-Muslim. Here's the question here, Alan. Facebook is a private company. Do they still have to take under certain recommendations and certain legalese here? If they make the decision as a private company, do they then have the right to be able to say, we think this is racist, we're the ones making the call?
Of course they do, if they're a private company, and any newspaper would have the right to make that call. The problem is that Facebook has become quasi-governmental in some ways. They have special immunity under the law, and the lawsuit very cleverly tries to tie the censorship into the governmental aspect of the immunity that Facebook has. But to the extent they're a private carrier, of course they have the right to decide. Now, would the telephone company have the right to decide that you couldn't make calls to a friend using racist language? Those are hard questions. We're at the cutting edge of where the internet interfaces with the First Amendment, and there are no clear answers.
I want to remind everybody both of those stories are at Newsmax.com. 30 seconds. We are a year later from the Iran nuclear deal being signed. It is holding. It is fragile. Who's won so far? 1 year
I don't
in?
think it's holding. I don't think it's holding. The German intelligence tells us they're cheating, and they are still enforcing terrorism. They are still calling for the destruction of a member state of the United Nations. I don't think the deal was a good deal. One hopes that perhaps it will slow down their progress toward a nuclear arsenal, but I still predict that before the 10-year sunset provision sets in on the deal, Iran will have nuclear weapons unless Israel or the United States or NATO prevents it from doing so, unfortunately, by military means. I don't think this deal served the interests of peace.
And the administration still says that it's a good thing. Reminder again, the book is called The Case Against the Iran Deal. How can we stop Iran from getting nukes? Pick up a copy and learn. Alan Dershowitz, thanks so much for being here. We'll get to your phone calls and a whole lot more when we turn to the political animal coming up next on The Hard Line.